The security footage would later show exactly 17 seconds between the first gunshot and the moment Sarah Chen grabbed the fire axe with her left hand, her right arm hanging useless and bleeding at her side. What the cameras couldn't capture was the look in her eyes as she turned to face her attackers, or the way her voice cut through the chaos when she said, "You picked the wrong building to hit tonight." This is the story of how a 28-year-old night shift security guard at the Metropolitan Research Institute became the only thing standing between a team of armed mercenaries and a breakthrough that could change the course of modern warfare forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had been working the overnight shift for 3 years, long enough to know every creak and whisper of the 15-story building. She preferred the quiet hours, the steady rhythm of patrol rounds, the way her footsteps echoed in empty hallways lined with laboratories where brilliant minds worked to solve humanity's greatest challenges. The institute housed everything from cancer research to advanced materials science, but tonight, as Sarah would soon discover, someone was after something far more dangerous hidden in the building's most secure sublevel. It was 2:47 a.m. when Sarah first noticed the anomaly. She was reviewing the security feeds from her station on the ground floor when camera 7 on the third floor flickered and went dark. Not unusual by itself, but then camera 12 on the fifth floor followed suit. Then camera 3 in the east stairwell. The pattern was too deliberate, too systematic. Someone was moving through the building, systematically disabling surveillance as they went. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. 3 years in private security had followed 4 years as a military police officer in the Army, where she'd learned that hesitation kills and preparation saves lives. She activated the silent alarm that would alert both local police and the Institute's emergency response team, then began her own assessment. The elevators showed normal operation, but the access logs revealed something that made her blood run cold. Someone had used a high-level administrative keycard to enter the building 43 minutes ago, but there were no scheduled overnight access permissions in the system. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Moving quickly but quietly, Sarah grabbed her equipment and began a systematic sweep of the building. The Institute's layout worked against intruders with multiple choke points and a maze-like arrangement of laboratories and offices, but it also meant she could be trapped if she wasn't careful. She moved through the first and second floors methodically, checking each lab and office space. Everything appeared normal until she reached the third floor, where she found the first disabled camera lying on the floor, its lens carefully shattered. The evidence was mounting, but Sarah needed more information. She made her way to the central security office on the 7th floor, where she could access the building's master systems. What she discovered there changed everything. The administrative keycard that had been used belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb, the Institute's former director of materials research, who had been terminated 6 months earlier after attempting to sell classified research to foreign buyers. The keycard should have been deactivated, but someone with significant technical expertise had managed to reactivate it. As Sarah studied the access logs more carefully, she began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The intruders weren't random thieves or vandals, they were moving with purpose toward the sub-level laboratories where the Institute's most sensitive projects were housed. Specifically, they seemed to be heading for Lab B7, where a team of researchers had been developing something called Project Aegis, a new type of body armor material that could theoretically stop any projectile while remaining lightweight and flexible. Sarah had heard whispers about Project Aegis from the day shift guards. The material was supposedly revolutionary, incorporating nanotechnology and advanced polymer science to create protection that would render traditional weapons obsolete. If such technology fell into the wrong hands, it could shift the balance of power globally, making whoever possessed it nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a simple break-in. This was a sophisticated operation to steal technology that could change warfare forever, and she was the only person standing between the intruders and their objective. The police response time to the Institute was typically 12 to 15 minutes, and the emergency response team would take even longer. By then the intruders could be long gone with technology worth billions of dollars and countless lives. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She could try to hide and wait for backup, hoping the intruders wouldn't find what they were looking for in time. Or she could do her job and protect the facility, even if it meant facing trained professionals with superior numbers and firepower. Her military training had taught her that sometimes the most important battles are fought not because you can win, but because losing is unacceptable. She began preparing for a confrontation she knew would test every skill she had learned and every ounce of courage she possessed. Sarah checked her equipment one final time: her radio, flashlight, pepper spray, and the emergency fire axe mounted on the wall. Against trained mercenaries with military-grade weapons, it wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. She had 13 minutes before the intruders would reach the sub-level labs, and she intended to use every second. As she moved toward the stairwell that led to the building's lower levels, Sarah couldn't have known that in less than an hour her name would be on every news channel in the country, or that the 17 seconds captured on security camera would be analyzed by military tacticians around the world. All she knew was that sometimes ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things, and tonight was her turn. Sarah descended the stairwell toward sub-level 1 with calculated precision, her footsteps muffled by the tactical approach she'd learned during her military service. Each floor she passed brought her closer to the inevitable confrontation, and she used the time to mentally prepare for what lay ahead. The building's ventilation system hummed around her, but underneath that familiar sound, she could hear something else, the faint echo of voices speaking in hushed tones somewhere below. She paused at the sub-level 1 access door and pressed her ear against the cold metal. 3 distinct voices, speaking what sounded like accented English. Professional clipped tones that suggested military training. One voice was giving instructions about maintaining perimeter security while another discussed extraction timelines. Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. These weren't opportunistic thieves but a coordinated team of professionals executing a carefully planned operation. The sub-level layout flashed through Sarah's mind as she considered her options. The main corridor ran east to west, with laboratory spaces branching off on both sides. Lab B7, where Project Aegis was housed, sat at the far western end, requiring the intruders to pass through nearly the entire sub-level to reach it. If she could position herself strategically, she might be able to slow their progress enough for backup to arrive. Sarah carefully opened the stairwell door and peered into the corridor. Emergency lighting cast long shadows between the laboratory doors, creating a maze of light and darkness that could work to her advantage. 50 feet down the hallway, she could see a figure in black tactical gear methodically checking each laboratory door. The intruder carried what appeared to be a military-grade assault rifle and moved with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to hostile environments. Moving as quietly as possible, Sarah slipped into the corridor and took cover behind a large equipment cart parked outside Lab B3. From this position she could observe the intruder's movements while remaining hidden. The figure was systematically checking each lab space, clearly searching for something specific. When he reached Lab B5, he spoke into a radio headset in a language Sarah didn't recognize, then continued toward the western end of the corridor. Sarah realized this was her moment. The intruder was focused on his search and temporarily isolated from his team. If she could neutralize him quietly, she might be able to even the odds before the others arrived. She gripped the firing hold tightly and began moving closer, using the shadows and equipment scattered throughout the corridor as cover. 20 feet from her target, everything went wrong. A motion sensor that Sarah had forgotten about triggered an automated announcement. Motion detected in sub-level laboratory section B. Please present identification. The voice echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, and the intruder spun around immediately, his weapon rising toward Sarah's position. Training and instinct took over. Sarah dove sideways as the first burst of gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off metal equipment where she had been standing moments before. She rolled behind a heavy laboratory table and heard the intruder shouting into his radio, calling for backup. The sound of running footsteps echoed from the eastern end of the corridor. More team members responding to the alert. Security personnel in sub-level B, the intruder called out in heavily accented English. One armed with edged weapon, requesting immediate support. Sarah's mind raced as she calculated her options. 3, possibly 4 armed professionals were now converging on her position, and she was trapped in a corridor, with limited cover. The heavy laboratory table provided temporary protection, but it wouldn't stop rifle rounds indefinitely. She needed to move, but any movement would expose her to gunfire. The sound of tactical radios crackled through the air as the intruders coordinated their approach. Sarah caught fragments of their communication: maintain suppression fire, advance from East Corridor. No witnesses. That last phrase sent a chill through Sarah's spine. These weren't just thieves, they were prepared to kill anyone who stood in their way. The stakes had just escalated from protecting technology to protecting her own life and the lives of anyone who might arrive for backup. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of boots moving tactically down the corridor, the measured pace of professionals who knew how to clear a hostile environment. She estimated 30 seconds before they would be in position to flank her hiding spot. The fire axe felt heavy in her hands as she realized how outmatched she was, but retreat wasn't an option. Between her and the stairwell stood at least 2 armed intruders, and running would only expose her back to their weapons. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made a decision that would define the next hour of her life. Instead of waiting for the intruders to maneuver into advantageous positions, she would force them to react to her actions. She grabbed a heavy piece of laboratory equipment from the floor and hurled it toward the eastern end of the corridor, where it crashed loudly against a wall. The noise drew immediate gunfire, muzzle flashes lighting up the corridor as the intruders fired at the sound. Using the distraction, Sarah sprinted toward the nearest laboratory door, hoping to find better cover or an alternate route. She had almost reached the doorway when she heard the sharp crack of a rifle behind her and felt something slam into her right shoulder with tremendous force. The impact spun her around and sent her crashing into the laboratory door, which gave way under her weight. Pain exploded through her arm as she realized she'd been shot, but adrenaline kept her moving. She stumbled into the laboratory and slammed the door behind her, her right arm already going numb from the wound. Blood was flowing freely, but she was alive and still mobile. As Sarah looked around the darkened laboratory searching for anything that could help her survive the next few minutes, she heard the intruders regrouping in the corridor outside. They were speaking rapidly in their foreign language, and she could hear the confidence in their voices. They thought they had her trapped and wounded. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The laboratory Sarah had stumbled into was a materials testing facility, filled with equipment she barely recognized in the dim emergency lighting. Her right arm hung useless at her side, blood seeping through her security uniform and dripping onto the floor. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of her shoulder, missing bone but tearing through muscle and leaving her dominant arm completely non-functional. Every heartbeat sent waves of pain through her body, but Sarah forced herself to focus on survival. Outside the laboratory door, she could hear the intruders organizing their assault. Their voices were closer now, and she caught fragments of English mixed with what sounded like Russian or Eastern European language. "Target is wounded and trapped in B4, one voice reported. Beginning breach sequence now." Sarah looked around desperately for anything that could help her. The laboratory contained various testing apparatus, including a device that appeared to be some kind of high-pressure materials tester, and several workbenches covered with sample materials and tools. Her left hand, normally her non-dominant hand, would have to become her lifeline. She grabbed a heavy wrench from the nearest workbench and positioned herself behind a large piece of testing equipment. The door handle turned slowly, and Sarah held her breath. Professional soldiers always checked for traps before entering unknown spaces, and these intruders were clearly following military protocols. The door opened just a crack, and the barrel of an assault rifle appeared, followed by a small device that Sarah recognized as a tactical mirror used to check corners without exposing the operator. Thinking quickly, Sarah grabbed a beaker full of some kind of chemical solution from the workbench and hurled it toward the door. The glass shattered against the doorframe, and the chemical began eating into the metal with a violent hissing sound. She had no idea what the substance was, but the reaction was dramatic enough to cause the hostile has chemical weapons, someone reported over radio. Exercise extreme caution. The delay gave Sarah precious seconds to better position herself and assess her situation. Her right arm was becoming increasingly numb, but the bleeding seemed to be slowing slightly. She could move her fingers, which meant the bullet hadn't severed any major nerves, but the arm was essentially useless for any task requiring strength or coordination. A smoke grenade rolled through the laboratory door, filling the space with thick, choking smoke. Sarah pressed her shirt against her nose and mouth, trying to filter the air while maintaining visual contact with the doorway. Through the haze, she could see the tactical lights of the intruders as they prepared to enter. The first figure appeared through the smoke, moving low and fast with his weapon sweeping the room. Sarah waited until he was past her hiding spot, then struck with the wrench, catching him across the back of the head. The blow wasn't as powerful as it would have been with her dominant hand, but it was enough to stagger him and send his weapon clattering across the floor. Before she could press her advantage, gunfire erupted from the doorway as a second intruder provided covering fire for his teammate. Bullets sparked off the equipment around Sarah, forcing her to dive for cover again. The wounded intruder was already recovering, reaching for a sidearm when Sarah launched herself forward and tackled him to the ground. Fighting with one functional arm was like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. Every move she had learned in hand-to-hand combat required the use of both arms for leverage and control. The intruder was larger and stronger than Sarah, and even wounded, he was a formidable opponent. They rolled across the laboratory floor, crashing into equipment and scattering scientific instruments. Sarah managed to get her left arm around the intruder's throat, applying a chokehold she had learned during military training. But without her right arm to secure the hold properly, the intruder was able to break free and throw her against a workbench. Pain exploded through her wounded shoulder as she hit the hard surface, and for a moment, her vision went dark. When her sight cleared, the intruder was standing over her, with his recovered sidearm pointed at her head. Through the dissipating smoke, she could see two more figures entering the laboratory. The tactical situation had gone from bad to impossible. "Enough games," the intruder said in accented English. "You have caused sufficient delay. Watch. Where are the others?" Sarah realized they thought she was part of a larger security. They didn't know she was alone. "They're coming," she gasped, hoping to buy more time. Full tactical response. "You have maybe 2 minutes before this place is surrounded." The intruder's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he couldn't afford to ignore the possibility. He spoke rapidly into his radio, and Sarah caught the words "accelerate timeline" and "primary objective." "You will guide us to Laboratory B7, he continued, pressing the gun barrel against her forehead. "Any attempt to mislead us will result in immediate termination." Sarah's mind raced as she considered her options. Leading the Project Aegis would mean handing over technology that could change global warfare, but refusing would mean immediate death, and wouldn't stop them from finding the laboratory anyway. She needed a third option, something that would give her another chance to stop them. "The lab has biometric security." Sarah lied, hoping her knowledge of the building's security systems was detailed enough to be convincing. "I can get you past the door locks, but the vault inside requires both my handprint and retinal scan. If you kill me, you'll never get to the actual research." The intruder studied her face carefully, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he made his "You will cooperate completely. Any deception will be met with severe consequences." He gestured to one of his teammates, who produced a field medical kit and began treating Sarah's wounded arm. As the medic worked to stop the bleeding and stabilize her shoulder, Sarah realized she had bought herself time and mobility. But at a terrible cost. She was now leading the enemy directly to their objective, and her only hope was to find a way to stop them before they could escape with the technology that could reshape the future of warfare.
The temporary bandage felt tight around her shoulder, and while her right arm remained largely useless, the treatment had stopped the bleeding and reduced the immediate pain. As the intruders prepared to move toward Laboratory B7, Sarah began planning her next move, knowing that she might only get one more chance to prevent a catastrophe.
The march toward Laboratory B7 felt like a funeral procession, with Sarah as both the mourner and the condemned. 2 intruders flanked her while the third took point, their tactical formation suggesting years of coordinated operations. Her right arm hung in an improvised sling, throbbing with each heartbeat, but her left hand remained free. The lead intruder had made the mistake of assuming that a wounded security guard posed no further threat, a miscalculation that Sarah intended to exploit. The corridor stretched ahead like a tunnel of opportunity and desperation. Each step brought them closer to Project Aegis, but also deeper into the building's most secure section. Sarah's intimate knowledge of the Institute's layout began forming the foundation of a desperate plan. The building's emergency systems, the placement of fire suppression equipment, the location of power junctions, all of it could potentially be weaponized if she could create the right opportunity. The biometric scanner is 20 feet ahead, Sarah said, pointing toward Laboratory B7's reinforced door. The truth was that the lab used a simple keycard system, but the intruders had no way to verify her claim. "I'll need both hands to properly align with the scanner." The lead intruder, who seemed to be the team commander, considered this request. His eyes were cold and calculating, the look of someone who had made difficult decisions in hostile environments many times before. "You will use only your left hand. Any suspicious movement will result in immediate termination." As they approached the laboratory door, Sarah noticed something that sparked hope, a red emergency lever mounted on the wall near the entrance. She recognized it as the manual activation for the building's Halon fire suppression system, designed to flood the area with inert gas in case of fire. If she could trigger it, the resulting confusion might give her the chance she needed. The commander positioned his team strategically around the laboratory entrance, while keeping his weapon trained on Sarah. "Proceed with access sequence," he ordered. Sarah approached the door slowly, her left hand trembling slightly from adrenaline and blood loss. She had one chance to make this work. Instead of reaching for the keycard reader, she suddenly lunged toward the emergency lever and pulled it down with all her remaining strength. Immediately, warning sirens began blaring throughout the sub-level, and red lights started flashing. Within seconds, the Halon suppression system activated, flooding the corridor with inert gas designed to displace oxygen and prevent combustion. The intruders found themselves engulfed in a thick, disorienting cloud that limited visibility to mere inches. Sarah had anticipated the activation and held her breath while diving away from the laboratory door. The Halon gas was non-toxic but would cause confusion and disorientation, especially for people unfamiliar with the building's emergency systems. She crawled rapidly along the floor, staying below the thickest concentration of gas, and made her way toward a maintenance alcove she remembered from her regular patrols. Behind her, she could hear the intruders shouting orders and struggling to maintain formation in the gas-filled environment. Their tactical lights created strange diffused patterns in the thick atmosphere, but provided little actual illumination. Radio chatter increased dramatically as they tried to coordinate their response to the unexpected development. From her hiding spot in the maintenance alcove, Sarah could see the outline of one intruder moving past her position. He was separated from his team and clearly disoriented by the gas. This was her opportunity. She grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from the maintenance toolkit and waited for the perfect moment. When the intruder passed within arm's reach, Sarah struck with precision learned from years of training. Using her left hand, she brought the wrench down on the back of his knee, targeting the pressure point that would cause maximum damage with minimal effort. The intruder collapsed immediately, his weapon clattering away into the gas-shrouded corridor. Before he could call for help, Sarah applied a chokehold with her left arm, using her body weight to compensate for the loss of her right arm's leverage. The intruder struggled briefly, but was already weakened by the gas and the knee injury. Within moments, he lost consciousness. Sarah quickly retrieved his assault rifle and checked the magazine, nearly full. The weapon felt foreign in her left hand, but her military training had included weak hand shooting drills. She wouldn't be as accurate as with her dominant hand, but she could still be effective at close range. The Halon system began shutting down automatically after 90 seconds, and the gas started dissipating. Sarah used the remaining cover to move closer to where she estimated the other intruders were positioned. She could hear them regrouping and conducting a tactical count, which would soon reveal that one of their team members was missing. Kozlov, report status, the commander's voice called out through the clearing gas. When no response came, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of weapons being readied for combat. They now knew she had taken offensive action and would be expecting further resistance. The element of surprise was gone, but she had evened the odds slightly. As the gas cleared enough to restore visibility, Sarah found herself in a deadly game of cat and mouse with two remaining professional soldiers. They were experienced, well-armed, and now fully aware that she was more dangerous than they had initially assessed. But Sarah had advantages they couldn't fully appreciate: intimate knowledge of the building's layout, familiarity with its emergency systems, and the desperate determination of someone fighting to protect something larger than herself. She positioned herself behind a large electrical junction box and took aim with her captured weapon. Her left hand wasn't as steady as her right would have been, but at this range, precision was less important than speed and aggression. She had learned during her military service that sometimes the best defense is an overwhelming offense. The corridor fell silent, except for the distant sound of emergency sirens, still echoing through other parts of the building. Sarah controlled her breathing and waited for her opportunity, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Project Aegis fell into the wrong hands or whether she could hold the line long enough for backup to arrive. Through the settling gas, she could see movement as the remaining intruders began their search for both their missing teammate and the security guard, who had proven far more resourceful than they had anticipated. In the eerie silence that followed the Halon system's shutdown, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold: the distinctive sound of Dr. Marcus Webb's voice, echoing from the main corridor. The disgraced former director of materials research wasn't just connected to this operation, he was here, personally, overseeing the theft of his former project. His presence explained how the intruders had such detailed knowledge of the building's layout and security systems. "The delays are unacceptable," Webb's voice carried clearly through the corridor. "Project Aegis represents 5 years of my work, and I will not allow bureaucratic incompetence to prevent its proper exploitation. The technology belongs with people who understand its true potential." Sarah felt a surge of anger that temporarily overwhelmed her pain. Webb had been terminated not just for attempting to sell classified research, but for conducting unauthorized experiments that had endangered his entire team. His dismissal had been kept quiet to avoid damaging the Institute's reputation, but Sarah remembered the whispered stories about researchers who had reported safety violations and ethical concerns. From her position behind the electrical junction box, Sarah could see Webb entering the corridor flanked by 2 additional figures. The team was larger than she had initially realized, at least 5 people total, with military-grade equipment and professional coordination. Her situation had gone from desperate to nearly impossible. Dr. Chen was more resourceful than anticipated, the commander reported to Webb. "She has neutralized Kozlov and activated emergency systems to complicate our approach." Webb's laugh was bitter and familiar. "Sarah Chen, the night shift guard who thinks she's protecting something important. I hired her personally 3 years ago, you know, former military police with an exemplary service record and an unfortunate tendency to follow orders regardless of personal cost." He paused, and Sarah could hear him moving closer to her hiding spot. "Sarah, I know you can hear me. This doesn't have to end with your death." Sarah remained silent, but her grip on the assault rifle tightened. Webb's casual mention of her background confirmed what she had begun to suspect. This wasn't a random heist, but a carefully planned operation with inside information about the Institute's personnel and procedures. "The research you're trying to protect was funded with my grant applications, developed with my theoretical framework, and tested in laboratories that I designed." Webb continued. The Institute stole 5 years of my life's work and then discarded me when I tried to ensure it would be used responsibly. They wanted to hand revolutionary defensive technology to the highest military bidder, while I believed it should be shared globally to reduce the effectiveness of conventional weapons. The rationalization in Webb's voice was pathetic, but Sarah recognized the dangerous conviction of someone who had convinced himself that betrayal was actually heroism. She had encountered similar thinking during her military service, people who justified terrible actions by claiming noble motivations. Your new position offers better compensation and significantly improved working conditions, one of the new arrivals said in accented English. Dr. Webb has provided detailed specifications of your capabilities and psychological profile. We believe you would be a valuable addition to our organization. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of receiving a job offer while bleeding from a gunshot wound and hiding behind electrical equipment. But the comment revealed something important. Webb had been providing information about Institute personnel to foreign agents, potentially for months or years before tonight's operation. The technology you're protecting will be used to create invulnerable soldiers for whatever government pays the most, Webb called out. My new associates understand that such capabilities should be distributed more equitably. We're preventing a monopoly that could destabilize global military balance. Moving carefully to maintain cover, Sarah repositioned herself to get a better view of the corridor. Through a gap in the electrical equipment, she could see Webb standing near Laboratory B7's entrance, flanked by his mercenary allies. He looked older than she remembered, with the haggard appearance of someone who had been living under tremendous stress. What struck her most was how completely he had convinced himself that stealing classified research was actually a humanitarian act. She had seen similar mental gymnastics from soldiers who had cracked under pressure, but Webb's delusion was more elaborate and more dangerous because of his intimate knowledge of the technology involved. Your government will use Project Aegis to create an army of invincible soldiers, Webb continued. My associates represent a consortium of nations committed to ensuring that no single power maintains such overwhelming advantage. We're preventing future wars by making this technology universally available. Sarah finally broke her silence. You're not preventing wars, Marcus. You're starting them. Once everyone has access to invulnerable soldiers, conflicts will escalate beyond anything we've seen before. Her voice echoed through the corridor, bouncing off laboratory doors and equipment. Spoken like a true soldier, Webb replied. You've been trained to see everything in terms of conflict and victory. But some of us understand that true security comes from balance, not supremacy. The philosophical debate felt surreal given the circumstances, but Sarah recognized that Webb needed to justify his actions, even to himself. His psychological profile suggested someone who required external validation for his decisions, which might be exploitable. The Institute didn't discard you because you wanted responsible use of the technology, Sarah called out. They fired you because you were conducting unauthorized human trials that nearly killed 3 graduate students. This isn't about noble ideals, Marcus. This is about your ego. The silence that followed was telling. Even Webb's mercenary allies seemed uncomfortable with this revelation. Sarah had struck a nerve by reminding everyone present that Webb's motivation was personal revenge rather than global humanitarian concern. Enough conversation, the commander finally interrupted. We have extraction deadline to maintain. Proceed with laboratory access immediately. Sarah heard movement as the team prepared to breach Laboratory B7. Her brief psychological warfare had bought some time, but now she faced the reality that 5 armed professionals were about to gain access to technology that could change the nature of warfare forever. Her wounded condition and limited ammunition meant she couldn't stop them through direct confrontation, but she still had one advantage: her knowledge of Project Aegis itself, and a terrible idea that might be her only remaining option. The sound of cutting equipment echoed through the corridor as Webb's team began breaching Laboratory B7's reinforced door. Sarah's lie about biometric security had bought only minutes before they discovered the simple keycard access system. From her concealed position she could see sparks flying as they used military-grade breaching tools to cut through the electronic lock mechanism. Sarah's shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, and she could feel her strength slowly draining away despite the field treatment she had received. Blood loss and adrenaline were taking their toll, but she forced herself to think clearly about her remaining options. Direct confrontation was suicide against 5 armed professionals, and backup was still at least 10 minutes away according to her mental calculations. But there was something Webb and his allies didn't know about Project Aegis, something that might turn their victory into catastrophe. During her 3 years of night security at the Institute, Sarah had overheard conversations between researchers, read incident reports, and observed the extreme safety protocols surrounding the project. The revolutionary armor material wasn't just lightweight and bulletproof, it was also highly unstable in its raw form. The prototype material stored in Laboratory B7 was kept in specialized containment because exposure to certain electromagnetic frequencies could cause it to undergo rapid molecular decomposition, releasing toxic compounds and tremendous heat. The researchers had been working to stabilize the material for practical use, but the current samples were essentially controlled hazardous waste. Access achieved, the commander reported as the laboratory door finally gave way. Beginning interior sweep and target acquisition, Sarah heard footsteps entering the laboratory, followed by the sound of equipment being moved around as the team searched for their objective. She knew they would find the material storage vault within minutes. Webb's knowledge of the laboratory layout would guide them directly to their target. Making a decision that terrified her, Sarah emerged from her hiding spot and called out to the team. "Webb, you need to stop them before they open The footsteps in the laboratory paused, and she heard weapons being readied. Webb appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 of his mercenaries with their rifles trained on Sarah's position. "Another delaying tactic, Sarah?" Webb asked, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "The material samples in that vault are unstable," Sarah said, keeping her left hand visible and her captured weapon lowered. "They're prototype versions that haven't been stabilized for safe handling. If your team opens the containment system without proper equipment, you'll trigger a molecular breakdown that will kill everyone in this sub-level." Webb's expression shifted from confidence to concern. His scientific background meant he understood the implications of what Sarah was describing, even if he couldn't verify the specific details. "You're lying to protect the research," one of the mercenaries said in accented English. "I'm trying to prevent you from accidentally creating a toxic disaster that will make this entire building uninhabitable," Sarah replied. "Webb, you know the safety protocols for advanced materials research. You helped write them. Would the Institute store something called Project Aegis without extreme containment measures?" The doubt in Webb's eyes was growing. His knowledge of laboratory safety procedures was telling him that Sarah's warning could be legitimate, but his desperation to complete the mission was warring with his scientific caution. "The storage system has fail-safes," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Fail-safes that you haven't seen in 6 months," Sarah countered. "The project has been advancing rapidly since your departure. They've been developing more concentrated versions of the material, which means higher instability and more dangerous decomposition products." She was partially lying. The material was unstable, but not immediately lethal in the way she was describing. However, improper handling could indeed cause toxic releases and structural damage to the building. Her goal was to create enough doubt to make Webb reconsider the extraction method. "Even if your warning is accurate, we have protective equipment," the commander said impatiently. Mission continues as planned, but Sarah could see Webb wrestling with the scientific implications. His ego might have been driving this operation, but his training wouldn't allow him to ignore legitimate safety concerns. She pressed her advantage. "The containment vault uses an electromagnetic locking system," Sarah continued, knowing this detail was accurate from the safety briefings she had attended. "If you force it open without following the proper deactivation sequence, you'll expose the materials to the exact frequencies that trigger decomposition. Even with protective equipment, you won't survive the reaction." Webb turned to his team leader. "What protective measures do we have for chemical exposure?" "Standard tactical gear with basic filtration," the commander replied. "Nothing rated for laboratory-grade hazardous materials."
The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Webb's scientific knowledge was now working against his mercenary allies, creating exactly the kind of doubt Sarah had hoped to generate. She could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed the risks of proceeding against the consequences of failure. There is proper extraction sequence, Webb said finally, but it requires specific tools and takes approximately 30 minutes to complete safely. Unacceptable, the commander responded. Extraction window closes in 15 minutes. We take materials now or abort mission. Sarah realized she had created a fracture in the team's unity. Webb's scientific caution was conflicting with the mercenaries' operational timeline, and their disagreement might give her the opportunity she needed to prevent the theft entirely. I can help you extract the materials safely, Sarah offered, knowing the words felt like betrayal even as she spoke them. But it requires cooperation and patience. Rush the process, and you'll destroy what you came to steal. The silence that followed was filled with tension as 5 people considered options that ranged from dangerous to catastrophic. Webb's expression suggested he was beginning to understand that his perfectly planned heist was unraveling due to factors he hadn't anticipated. Sarah held her breath, knowing that her desperate gambit had created a brief opening, but also knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she could exploit it effectively.
The standoff in the corridor felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Webb paced nervously between his mercenaries and the laboratory entrance, his scientific mind battling with his commitment to the mission. Sarah could see the internal conflict playing out across his features, the cautious researcher warring with the desperate traitor who had burned all his bridges. 30 minutes is impossible, the commander stated flatly. Our extraction window closes when your government's tactical response arrives. We have perhaps 12 minutes before this location becomes untenable. Sarah's heart sank as she realized backup was still further away than she had hoped. 12 minutes meant she was truly alone for the foreseeable future, with no realistic prospect of outside assistance. Her gambit had created doubt, but it hadn't stopped the operation. Then we modify the approach, Webb said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he had used during his tenure as research director. Sarah, you will guide us through an accelerated extraction sequence. Any attempt at sabotage will result in immediate termination of all laboratory personnel. The threat confused Sarah until she heard voices coming from the eastern corridor, researchers arriving for the early morning shift, completely unaware of the danger they were walking into. Her radio crackled with confused chatter as the arriving scientists discovered disabled security cameras and unusual building activity. Dr. Reeves to security, we're seeing some irregular conditions on sublevel B. Can someone provide status update? Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice of Dr. Amanda Reeves, the lead researcher on Project Aegis and one of the few people who knew the material's true capabilities. If Webb's team captured her, they would have access to someone who could safely extract the materials and provide detailed technical specifications. Your colleagues have arrived early, Webb observed with satisfaction. How fortunate that we'll have expert assistance with the extraction process. The commander immediately dispatched 2 of his remaining team members to secure the arriving researchers. Sarah heard sounds of surprise and fear echoing through the corridors as scientists found themselves confronted by armed intruders. The operation had just escalated from theft to hostage-taking, dramatically increasing the stakes for everyone involved. Dr. Reeves, this is Sarah in security, she called into her radio before Webb could stop her. We have a code red situation in sublevel B. Evacuate immediately and contact federal authorities. Webb's expression hardened as he realized Sarah had warned the researchers, potentially compromising his team's ability to control them. That was unwise, he said, drawing a sidearm and pointing it directly at Sarah's head. The radio crackled with Dr. Reeves' response, Sarah, we're trapped in the eastern corridor. 3 researchers in custody of armed intruders. Request immediate assistance. The sound of Dr. Reeves' voice under duress filled Sarah with rage and desperation. These were innocent people whose only crime was arriving early for work, and now they were pawns in Webb's twisted revenge scheme. The weight of responsibility for their safety settled on her shoulders like lead. You have 30 seconds to convince Dr. Reeves to cooperate with material extraction, Webb told Sarah. If she refuses, we will execute 1 researcher every 60 seconds until compliance is achieved. Sarah felt the last of her hope drain away as she understood the true depths of Webb's fall from grace. The man who had once been dedicated to advancing human knowledge was now threatening to murder innocent scientists to steal the results of their work. The transformation was complete and horrifying. "Amanda, this is Sarah," she spoke into the radio with a voice she forced to remain steady. "They want you to help extract Project Aegis materials. The team leader is Dr. Marcus Webb, and they have superior firepower and training." There was a long pause before Dr. Reeves responded, and Sarah could hear the shock in her voice when she spoke. Marcus Webb, but he was terminated months ago for safety violations." "Current termination status is irrelevant," Webb interrupted, taking the radio from Sarah. "Dr. Reeves, you will provide technical assistance with material extraction or your colleagues will suffer the consequences of your refusal. You have 60 seconds to decide." Sarah watched Webb's face as he made his ultimatum, seeing nothing of the dedicated researcher he had once been. The transformation reminded her of soldiers she had known who had been damaged beyond repair by trauma and betrayal. But understanding Webb's psychological deterioration didn't make him any less dangerous. The sound of movement in the laboratory behind them indicated that the remaining mercenaries were preparing for the extraction attempt with or without proper safety protocols. Sarah realized that even if Dr. Reeves cooperated, the rapid timeline would likely result in accidental exposure to dangerous materials. "I'll cooperate," Dr. Reeves' voice came through the radio, heavy with defeat, "but I need assurance that my team will be released unharmed once the materials are secured." "You have my word as a former colleague," Webb replied, but Sarah could hear the lie in his voice. These people had seen too much and could identify too many details about the operation. Webb's mercenary allies would never allow witnesses to survive. Sarah felt herself reaching the breaking point as the full scope of the disaster became clear. Multiple innocent researchers were about to be murdered, revolutionary technology was about to be stolen by foreign agents, and she was powerless to prevent any of it. Her wounded condition, limited ammunition, and overwhelming enemy numbers made meaningful resistance impossible. Reeves being forced to cooperate with the theft of her own research, Sarah remembered something her drill sergeant had said during basic training. "When you can't win, you change the rules of the game." The laboratory behind them contained more than just Project Aegis materials. Sarah's knowledge of the Institute's research portfolio suddenly presented her with a terrifying possibility, one that might save the hostages and prevent the technology theft, but would require her to cross a line she had never imagined crossing. Looking at Webb's triumphant expression, Sarah began planning something that would either save everyone or kill them all. Sarah's realization came with the cold clarity of desperation. Laboratory B7 housed more than just Project Aegis. During her years of night security rounds, she had noticed that several research projects shared space in the heavily secured sublevel, including Dr. Hansen's work on experimental energy storage systems. Those prototype power cells, originally designed for next-generation electric vehicles, contained enough stored energy to power a city block, or to create an explosion that would obliterate everything within a quarter-mile radius. The power cells were stored in a specialized vault separate from the Aegis materials, with their own electromagnetic containment system. If someone with knowledge of their triggering mechanisms could cause them to cascade fail simultaneously, the resulting explosion would ensure that neither the armor technology nor anyone attempting to steal it would survive. It would also kill everyone in the building, including the hostages Sarah was trying to save. As Webb coordinated with Dr. Reeves over the radio, Sarah found herself contemplating mass murder as a form of protection. The thought horrified her, but the mathematics were brutally simple: 7 deaths here and now versus potentially thousands of deaths if invulnerable soldiers changed the nature of global warfare. Her military training had prepared her to make impossible choices, but never on this scale. Dr. Reeves, begin with the electromagnetic field generators, Webb was instructing. The containment system must be deactivated in sequence to prevent material degradation. Sarah could hear the fear and reluctance in Dr. Reeves' voice as she provided technical guidance to her former colleague. The researcher was being forced to hand over years of painstaking work to people who would use it to harm others, and Sarah could only imagine the psychological torture that represented. Moving carefully to avoid drawing attention, Sarah began positioning herself closer to the laboratory's secondary vault system where the power cells were stored. Her left hand traced the familiar weight of the assault rifle, while her mind calculated angles and timing. If she could reach the power cell controls and initiate an overload sequence, she would have approximately 90 seconds before the explosion. 90 seconds to get the hostages out of the building, notify emergency services, and potentially survive the blast herself. The odds were essentially zero, but zero was better than the certainty of global catastrophe if the Aegis technology fell into the wrong hands. Sarah remained visible and stationary, the commander ordered, apparently noticing her subtle movement. Any attempt to interfere with the extraction will result in immediate execution of hostages. The threat forced Sarah to stop moving, but it also confirmed what she had suspected. The mercenaries had no intention of allowing witnesses to survive. Their casual mention of hostage execution revealed that they were already planning to kill everyone present once the materials were secured. Sarah's contemplated sacrifice would save lives that were already forfeit. Through the laboratory doorway, she could see Webb directing his team toward the Aegis containment vault. Reeves' voice over the radio provided step-by-step instructions for safe material handling, each word bringing them closer to successfully stealing technology that could reshape global military balance. Electromagnetic field deactivated, one of the mercenaries reported. Containment vessel is accessible. Sarah felt time running out like sand through her fingers. In minutes, Webb's team would have the Aegis materials secured and would begin executing witnesses to eliminate evidence of their operation. Her window for preventing the theft was closing rapidly, and her only remaining option was becoming increasingly attractive despite its horrific cost. The radio crackled with Dr. Reeves' voice. "Marcus, the materials are extremely sensitive to vibration during transport. Any significant shock could cause molecular breakdown and toxic release. You need specialized transport containers." Sarah realized that Dr. Reeves was trying to buy time by emphasizing the dangers of improper handling. The researcher was hoping that additional delays might allow rescue to arrive, but Sarah knew that backup was still minutes away, too late to prevent the theft but possibly soon enough to witness the aftermath. "Transport containers are already prepared," Webb replied with satisfaction. "Your former colleagues in procurement were very helpful in identifying necessary equipment specifications." The revelation that Webb had inside assistance beyond his own knowledge made Sarah's situation even more desperate. The theft operation had been planned with institutional knowledge and proper equipment, meaning they had anticipated and prepared for the safety challenges Dr. Reeves was describing. "Material extraction in progress," the commander reported. Estimated completion in 4 minutes. 4 minutes until Webb's team had everything they needed and would begin eliminating witnesses. 4 minutes for Sarah to decide whether she could live with allowing the theft to succeed or die knowing she had prevented it through mass murder. Her military training had included scenarios about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices, but those discussions had been theoretical exercises, not decisions about killing innocent people to prevent larger tragedies. The weight of potential global consequences battled against her fundamental respect for human life. "Sarah," Dr. Reeves' voice came through her radio in a whisper, "if you can hear this, there's something they don't know about the Aegis materials. The current samples are connected to an experimental monitoring system that tracks their location continuously. Federal authorities will be able to follow the materials wherever they're taken." The information hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the materials could be tracked, then allowing the theft might not result in permanent loss of the technology. Recovery operations could potentially retrieve the stolen research before it was fully exploited, which meant her contemplated sacrifice might be unnecessary. But tracking systems could be disabled or blocked, and foreign governments had sophisticated capabilities for reverse engineering stolen technology. The possibility of recovery didn't guarantee prevention of catastrophic consequences. As Sarah wrestled with the most important decision of her life, she heard the sound of vehicles approaching the building at high speed. Backup was finally arriving, but whether they would be in time to prevent the completion of Webb's operation remained uncertain. The next 4 minutes would determine the fate of revolutionary technology, multiple innocent lives, and potentially the future of global warfare itself. The sound of tactical vehicles surrounding the building should have brought relief, but Sarah knew it would only accelerate Webb's timeline. Through her radio, she could hear law enforcement establishing a perimeter and attempting to make contact with the building's security systems. Their arrival meant the situation was about to become dramatically more dangerous for everyone trapped inside. Federal response has arrived, the commander reported to Webb. Extraction must be completed immediately, or aborted. Webb's voice carried a note of hysteria as he responded, "Abort is not an option. 5 years of work will not be lost because of poor timing. Accelerate material securing and prepare defensive positions." Sarah realized that Webb had passed the point of rational decision-making. His obsession with claiming Project Aegis had consumed whatever remained of his scientific objectivity, and he was now willing to engage in a firefight with federal agents rather than abandon his mission. The situation was evolving from theft to siege. "All materials secured in transport containers," one of the mercenaries announced. Ready for extraction sequence, the moment Sarah had been dreading had arrived. Webb's team had successfully stolen the Aegis technology, and now they would begin executing witnesses to eliminate evidence of their operation. Her window for preventing catastrophe had closed, leaving only her desperate contingency plan. "Dr. Reeves, your assistance is no longer required," Webb announced with chilling finality. "Eliminate all witnesses and prepare for hostile extraction." The gunshots that followed echoed through the building like thunder, each one representing another life lost to Webb's madness. Sarah felt something break inside her soul as she realized that innocent researchers were being murdered while she remained helpless to intervene. The weight of their deaths settled on her conscience like molten lead. "Sarah, this is Special Agent Morrison, FBI," her radio crackled to life. "We have the building surrounded and are prepared to negotiate for hostage release. Please respond with current status." Sarah keyed her radio with her left hand, her voice heavy with grief and rage. "Agent Morrison, this is Security Officer Chen. Multiple researchers have been executed by armed intruders, led by former Institute employee Dr. Marcus Webb. They have successfully stolen classified materials and are preparing to fight their way out." The silence that followed her report seemed to stretch forever. Sarah could imagine the FBI team processing the information and realizing that their hostage rescue operation had become a recovery mission for stolen technology and murdered civilians. "Officer Chen, what is your current position and condition?" Morrison asked. "Sublevel B, near Laboratory B7. I've been shot through the right shoulder but remain mobile. 5 hostiles with military-grade equipment and training." Sarah paused, then added the detail that made her next decision inevitable. "They're planning to use the Aegis technology to create invulnerable soldiers for foreign military applications." From the laboratory behind her, Sarah could hear Webb's team preparing for their escape attempt. They were discussing extraction routes and defensive positions, clearly planning to shoot their way past federal agents using the same tactical expertise they had employed to Agent Morrison, the stolen technology represents a game-changing advancement in personal armor. If it reaches foreign development facilities, it could destabilize global military balance. Sarah's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge as she prepared to make her final report. "I have access to experimental power cells that could prevent the technology theft through controlled demolition of this section." The radio remained silent for several long seconds before Morrison responded. "Officer Chen, do not attempt any demolition activities. We have technical specialists en route who can disable or recover the stolen materials through non-destructive means." But Sarah could hear movement in the corridor that suggested Webb's team was beginning their extraction. They would be gone before technical specialists could arrive, taking revolutionary armor technology with them to whoever had hired them. Her last chance to prevent global catastrophe was slipping away while she waited for permission to act. "Agent Morrison, they're beginning extraction now. Technical specialists won't arrive in time to prevent permanent loss of the technology." Sarah moved closer to the power cell controls, her left hand hovering over the activation sequence. "I can stop them, but the window is closing rapidly." "Negative, Officer Chen. Do not engage in demolition activities. That's a direct order from federal authority." Sarah felt the crushing weight of impossible choices. Federal agents were ordering her to allow the theft to proceed, but her knowledge of the technology's implications told her that compliance would eventually cost thousands of lives. Her military oath had included promises to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but it had also included obligations to follow lawful orders from superior authority. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them as Webb's team engaged federal agents in their escape attempt. The battle had begun, and Sarah was running out of time to influence its outcome. Every second she hesitated was another second closer to seeing invulnerable enemy soldiers on future battlefields. Agent Morrison, with respect, you don't understand what they're stealing, Sarah said into her radio as she began entering the power cell activation sequence. This technology will make conventional weapons obsolete. Every American soldier in future conflicts will face enemies who can't be killed by standard ammunition. Officer Chen, cease all activities immediately. You are not authorized to make decisions about national security implications. But Sarah had already committed to her course of action. The power cell activation sequence was irreversible once initiated, and she had started the countdown that would determine whether stolen technology escaped to threaten future American lives. Her finger hovered over the final activation key as she made peace with the consequences of her choice. Agent Morrison, tell my family I did what I thought was right, Sarah said, then pressed the final key and began counting down from 90 seconds. The power cells began their cascade failure sequence, and Sarah started running toward the stairwell, hoping against hope that she could reach the surface before the explosion that would either save thousands of future lives or mark her as the woman who chose mass murder over following orders. The power cell cascade failure created a sound like the world tearing itself apart. Sarah had made it to sub-level 2 when the explosion erupted behind her, a wall of superheated air and debris that lifted her off her feet and hurled her against the stairwell wall. The building shook like an earthquake, emergency lights flickered and died, and for a moment that felt like eternity, Sarah couldn't hear anything but ringing in her ears. When consciousness returned, she found herself lying in a hospital bed surrounded by the sterile white of intensive care. Her right arm was immobilized in a complex traction system, and her left hand was connected to monitoring equipment that beeped steadily. Through the window, she could see news trucks gathered in the hospital parking lot like vultures waiting for information. You've been unconscious for 3 days, a familiar voice said from beside her bed. Sarah turned her head to see Agent Morrison sitting in a visitor's chair, his expression unreadable. The explosion you triggered killed Webb and 4 of his mercenaries instantly. It also destroyed Laboratory B7 and everything in it, including the Project Aegis materials. Sarah tried to speak but found her throat too dry to form words. Morrison noticed her difficulty and offered her, which she accepted gratefully with her left hand. When she could finally speak, her first question surprised even herself. Dr. Reeves, dead, Morrison replied simply. Along with 3 other researchers, Webb executed them before you triggered the explosion, just as you reported. The confirmation hit Sarah like a physical blow. 4 innocent people had died because she couldn't find a way to save them, and their deaths would haunt her for whatever remained of her life. The fact that she had prevented a larger catastrophe didn't diminish the weight of their loss. The media is calling you everything from a hero to a terrorist, Morrison continued. Congressional committees want to question you about unauthorized destruction of classified materials. The FBI wants to understand how a security guard gained access to experimental power cells. And the families of the dead researchers want to know why you couldn't save their loved ones. Sarah closed her eyes as the full scope of her situation became clear. She had prevented a technology theft that could have changed global warfare, but at the cost of multiple innocent lives and the destruction of years of scientific research. The moral calculus was impossible to balance. What's the official story? She asked. Terrorists led by a disgraced former employee attempted to steal classified research. Security officer Sarah Chen heroically attempted to prevent the theft and was severely injured when the terrorists triggered an explosion to destroy it. Evidence of their operation. Morrison's tone suggested he didn't believe the official narrative any more than Sarah did. And the truth,
The truth is classified at levels higher than either of us are authorized to discuss. Morrison leaned forward in his chair. But off the record, your actions prevented something that would have killed a lot more people than died in the technology Webb was stealing would have changed warfare in ways that would have made every conventional military force obsolete. Sarah understood that she would never receive official recognition for her decision, and that the moral complexity of her actions would never be publicly acknowledged. She had chosen to kill innocent people to prevent a larger catastrophe, and that choice would define the rest of her life regardless of its ultimate justification. There's something else, Morrison said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Reeves managed to transmit a message to federal servers before she died. She wanted you to know that the Aegis materials Webb stole were actually decoy samples, convincing fakes designed to test security protocols. The real research was stored at a different facility entirely. The revelation hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. She had destroyed a building, killed multiple people, and ended her own career to prevent the theft of technology that was never actually at risk. Dr. Reeves had died protecting research that existed safely, and Sarah had committed what amounted to mass murder for nothing. Why didn't anyone tell me about the decoys? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Need-to-know basis. Security personnel weren't informed about the decoy system to make their reactions more convincing. Morrison's expression suggested he understood the cruel irony of the situation. Dr. Reeves left specific instructions that you be informed of the truth. She wanted you to know that your sacrifice had meaning, even if the circumstances were different than you understood. Sarah stared at the ceiling as she processed the information. Everything she had believed about the stakes of her decision had been wrong, but that didn't change the fact that she had chosen to kill people to prevent what she believed was a greater evil. The moral weight of her actions remained the same regardless of whether her factual understanding had been correct. What happens now? She asked. Now you recover, answer some questions and try to build a life with the knowledge of what you've done and why you did it. Morrison stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice based on the information you had. That's all any of us can do. After Morrison left, Sarah lay in the hospital bed thinking about the nature of heroism and sacrifice. She had acted to prevent what she believed would be a catastrophe, and her actions had indeed prevented the theft of classified technology. But the people who died because of her decision were just as dead regardless of whether their sacrifice had been necessary. Outside her window, the news trucks continued their vigil, waiting for a statement from the woman who had chosen to destroy everything rather than allow it to be stolen. Sarah Chen would eventually leave the hospital and try to rebuild her life, but she would carry forever the knowledge that sometimes the line between heroism and villainy is measured in intentions rather than outcomes. The fire axe she had grabbed with her left hand after being shot through her right arm had become a symbol of determination in the face of impossible odds. But Sarah knew the real weapon had been her willingness to make choices that would haunt her forever, and that was a burden no amount of recognition could lighten. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.